One of the most fascinating, but sometimes difficult to understand, passage in the New Testament is in Luke 16 that speaks to us about the unfaithful steward, the unrighteous steward, the bad steward, or an evil steward, depending on the version you're reading. Based on this man's strategy in this parable, sometimes it may be difficult to understand, and we may ask ourselves, why is it that this bad steward, this bad person, is being praised? So let's see what this is about, and let's allow the Bible to clarify this for all of us. So I invite you to study this parable that I know will edify your life and your heart, because all who remain in God will produce much fruit and will be pruned to produce much more. Luke chapter 16 speaks to us about the parable of the steward. Today we will discuss 2 points, and tomorrow 2 additional points that will allow us to study this parable in detail. It says, Jesus told his disciples there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. Notice that here it says Jesus told his disciples, and based on this we should understand that this parable follows the parable of the prodigal son studied in Luke chapter 15 that talks about poor stewardship and waste. So this contrasts with the prodigal son who also spent or splurged the resources he had received on behalf of his father. Now here we're talking about how Jesus speaks to his disciples to teach them. And so it's important to understand that this was not a lesson for false believers. No, here Jesus wants to teach a life lesson to his disciples. So Jesus tells them this story about a steward and a master. Now this steward did absolutely everything for his master, managing his possessions. But it says that he was a bad steward, and he was accused with proof before his master, the rich man, by others for wasting his possessions. Verse 2 of Luke 16. So he called him in and asked him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer." And I want to highlight this verse because remember that a steward, a manager, is always exposed to be called into account, to give account of what he has, what he's done. Our lives are not ours, they belong to the Lord. And at any moment, God can call us to give account. Some are called definitively to his presence and asked to give account of what he or she did, what he or she said or did not say. But sometimes God calls us to give account here on earth while we are alive, because perhaps we had everything we needed and we lost it. So he calls us to give account. What are you doing with your life? Sometimes we complain that we do not have enough, that we are poor, that nothing goes well for us. But the question is, what are we doing with our life, with our time, with our talents? And think about this today, because God does not do everything for us, nor does he spoon feed us. God gives us the resources, but he wants us to prepare, to study, to learn, to maximize our time, to manage our resources well. And this is the point here in this topic of stewardship, that each day we must be conscious that our life is a gift from God, that our health is a gift from God, that our 5 senses are a gift from God, and we must use all of these well. But always remember, this word, give account of your management, should always be in our minds and in our hearts, because God can call us at any moment to give account. Give account of how you're raising your children. Give account of how you're leading your marriage and your personal life. If you're single, give account of what you're doing as you're single. And so here, the master, the rich man, with proof in his hands, calls upon the manager to give account of his work with the intention of firing him. Verse 3 says, the manager said to himself, "What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg." And so here we see that this manager had lived at the expense of his master, and he was not used to the toil of life. He did not want to work extensively physically. And so this man begins to think and plan and scheme. Verses 4 through 7. "I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses." So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?" 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. And here we see how this manager began to use shrewdness. And this is why this parable calls him the shrewd manager, using human methods to cheat, to deceive. And in regards to business, never forget that when we use fraudulent methods, even if the other person does not realize or will never know, and I'm trying to take advantage, I must be very careful because God does not approve such methods. Often we hear the word cunning or this person is very cunning, referring to someone who will always take advantage or gain the upper hand through cheating or deception. But this behavior is not correct, my dear family. To act this way doesn't make us more intelligent or wiser than others, because to act this way must remind us what the Bible tells us, that everything we sow, we reap. Because sometimes we give this names. We say, no, this person is wise, they're cunning, or that's how things work. But no, that's not how things work. Call things by their proper name in order to understand the truth of what is being done and how it's being done. Here, the manager falsified the books, reducing the amount of each debt with the purpose of gaining grace with them, so that when he would be fired from his job, they would take him into their home. And so by reducing their debt, this manager gained the gratitude of each one of them, because out of gratefulness they would feel obligated to receive him in their home at any time. Now, verse 8. Here we find a very important point that people often get confused with. And let me explain it. Here it says, the master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. Look, here we see that the rich man or the master was also a shrewd and greedy man. And we see this reflected here because it says that the master commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. And so here we see how this master applauds what the manager did, although it was dishonest. So this admiration reflects who he was. The fallen hearts of this world tend to admire the shrewdness of the evildoers. Based on this, we will study the 4 lessons in our devotional. Let's look at the first lesson. Point number 1, and take note: the shrewdness of the world and spiritual negligence. It calls my attention what it says here in verse 8. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. Jesus is teaching us a very important lesson here, because he is saying that the men of this world are more shrewd, more cunning, more focused on seeking gains than Christians are focused on seeking what is truly beneficial. In other words, what comes from God. And it's not that the manager being questioned here did what was right when deceiving his master, when he reduced the accounts of the debtors. Because many ask me about this when they read this parable. Here, credit is not being given to someone who is cheating or deceiving. The lesson here is that he made the effort to find a way to get out of this situation by planning each detail. So generally, human nature tends to seek their own benefit persistently in any way possible. But rarely do we see this determination in Christians and in God's children. This is the reality here. How much more authentic would Christians be if we would determine to live out our faith no matter the consequence? Just as the people of this world are determined to make money and get ahead. And this is the truth. Generally, the natural man seeks excellence for personal reasons, even fleshly reasons. But where are the men and women of God? Look, the natural man has been capable of crossing all the continents, of reaching the moon, discovering new frontiers, doing whatever it takes. What hasn't the natural man done to reach power, fame, selfishly? Because the natural man in this world seeks to be excellent in everything for these reasons. But how much more diligent should we be as Christians in everything we do? Because what we do, we must do it for the Lord whom we serve. So the contrast here is that often the sons of darkness teach us a great lesson because they invest resources and more resources to advance their selfish agendas. And this is why the world is in the condition it's in. Because they do more and more, they invest more, drawing more people in to commit to their evil plans, committing to their agenda. But this contrasts with God's children. What would happen if we as Christians were as committed and determined as the people of the world? But when you look deep within the churches or within Christianity, more times than not, we will see how people do not want to pay the price to be committed to the work, or the things that we must do for God are last on our list. Or if I have time, if I get to it, I'll try to do something. This is the sad reality, and this is why perhaps we haven't reached the entire world and all the nations with the gospel, while the sons of darkness give us testimony of how they work tirelessly to reach the world, because this is their goal, for there to be less and less believers, and for everyone to be absorbed with their agenda, for people to be consumed with materialism, with consumerism, with life in the flesh, passions, addictions. So scripture is telling us that they do this for selfish reasons. But whatever we do as Christians, we must first give our hearts to God. The shrewd manager found a way to survive, but we as Christians should have that same drive and determination for the things of God. The second lesson that we'll be studying here of this Luke 16 is that whatever we manage materially must achieve eternal earnings as our final goal. And I love this. Verse 9 says, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. So let's analyze this context. What is worldly wealth? Well, this represents material riches, to which we should manage, because the possessions themselves are not sin. Money is not evil. According to the Bible, what is evil is the love of money. The use we give money and possessions. Are we using money to promote prostitution, drug addiction, alcoholism, and many other things? And this is what the Bible calls evil. Because with the same money, schools can be built, hospitals can be built, churches can be opened, and the gospel can be shared. And so the possessions themselves are not sinful, but they are a responsibility. And those who use possessions to help others are fulfilling the requirement of being good managers. Here we see how the bad manager uses his master's money for his own benefit. In other words, to buy friends, and he would benefit in exchange and be able to have stability here on earth when he was received in their homes. So what is the lesson for us here as believers? Well, that we should use material possessions, worldly possessions, and through our gifts and our talents, channel these not just for our own gain, but for the benefit, everlasting, spiritual, to help those God has commanded us to help. It's sad when sometimes I ask Christians, how is your balance? How was your year? And the response is, well, Pastor, I've been blessed. God has blessed my company, my business, by my earnings. Everything is great. And my second question is, okay, how is your relationship with God? And the response is, well, I haven't been to church in a while. I haven't had time for church because I've been busy with work, with business. So how can a Christian give account of their life only in material terms? Because that means that you're not doing well. Because if one day God rescued me from a vain lifestyle, giving me the gift of having Christ in my heart, it is because he knew that my true need is spiritual, not material. But often we live and function of material things. And anytime we're asked if we're doing well or not, rarely do we respond with a spiritual answer. And instead we reply with financial terms. And this is what this point is telling us. Through this bad manager that used his master's money to buy earthly friends, because we as believers should use our master's money in such a way that we win friends for eternity. This is what we call investing in what is eternal, This is why here it says, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Look, the material possessions that we must manage are an opportunity to earn the true possessions that are eternal. I love when Romans 2 verses 6 and 10, that God says that God will pay each one according to their deeds. Glory, honor, and peace for everyone who does good. Remember that Jesus tells us, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where the moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. Treasures in heaven are created by using properly what we are given to manage here on earth. And these treasures of heaven are real, authentic. They will never be lost. The bad manager only acted in terms of this world on this earth, but a true Christian must have their mind set on the things above, where Christ is sitting at the right hand of God. And tomorrow we'll continue with the next 2 points. Pray with me right where you are, and let's say, Lord, wow, how much I'm learning from this parable in regards to this manager. This great lesson in your word, where God is inviting us to use our wisdom, our gifts, our talents, wisely, cunningly using the means and the resources necessary, but not for our own selfish gain, but instead for the extension of His kingdom. Here, God is inviting us to use our earthly possessions, but to achieve heavenly wealth. Lord, speak to each listener of Mana who is praying this prayer this morning, and ask each one what they are doing with their life, with their gifts, with their talents, with their time and resources to make the name of the Lord be known. We commend ourselves to you. We ask for your blessing and your presence this day. Thank you for going in front of us, for guarding us and sustaining us in Christ Jesus. And I await for you tomorrow in our next devotional time. Blessings to all.